want to first bring in a special guest for our next segment. If you've been to a grocery store anytime in the last few months, chances are you've noticed that food prices are soaring. A new survey by Food Banks Canada found that as many as 1 in 4 Canadians are eating less because of rising prices. As many as 1 in 5 say they're likely to use a food bank. But at the same time, Canada's biggest grocery store retailers are reporting record profits. Last year, they made $7.3 billion in pre-tax profits, which is more than double what they made before the pandemic. And it's not just grocery stores that are making obscene profits in the midst of a crisis. Oil and gas, big banks, real estate, food and drink manufacturers, they've all been padding their bottom lines. Statistics Canada says that in the first quarter of this year, the after-tax corporate profits broke new records, even as inflation surged. To help us make sense of all of this, we've invited Jim Stanford, the director of the Center for Future Work and a longtime union researcher. He joins me from Vancouver today. Hi, Jim. Welcome to The Root Show.
Danya, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's really great to have you. So Canadian corporations have been profiting enormously from the pandemic and now from inflation. Meanwhile, for lots of people in Canada, the standard of living has been actually declining. Prices are going up, wages are going down. How do you explain what's going on here?
You know, it's funny. People don't think of it this way, but who actually sets the prices for these things? You know, it isn't the workers in the grocery store who determine what the food is going to sell for. It's the grocery store. And same goes for the gas stations, and same goes for the housing developments and all the other things where the price has been rising sky high. So frankly, we shouldn't be too surprised that corporate profits have surged as inflation has taken off. Now, there's all kinds of things happening in the background, of course. As the world economy reopens after the pandemic, we've had lots of problems in the traditional supply chains. Things like semiconductors, for example, very hard to get. That drives up the price. Of course, the war in Ukraine and then the spike in global energy prices, that's translated directly and very quickly into things like the gasoline we buy in Canada. Even if that gasoline was refined from oil pumped from the ground in Canada months before Putin invaded Ukraine, you know, so there's no obvious connection, frankly, between Ukraine and the price of petrol, but that's how the global oil market has done it. And all the other prices that are going up. It's companies that are taking advantage of the moment of the stresses and uncertainty after the pandemic. That's what corporations were designed to do. They have the legal status of an individual in our law. They have powers and rights and protections. And their mandate, literally and legally, is to maximize the wealth of shareholders. And that means maximizing the flow of profits. In fact, you could argue that's illegal for corporate directors to do anything other than try to maximize their profits. So, you know, on the one hand, I don't want to let them off the hook in terms of morality. You know, the billionaires who own grocery store chains like Loblaws are making a killing and off of the backs of poor people who can barely afford their groceries. But we shouldn't be under any illusions. This is how we've organized our economy, and that's what those companies are going to do unless and until we put other restrictions in place that force them to behave in a more fair and socially accountable way.
I really want to put some visuals to this, to the kinds of profits we're talking about, and I want to throw up on the screen a graph that you produced, actually, which shows that this year corporate profits have been the highest that they've been in more than 60 years, and they've had the highest share of total GDP that they've had in all of these years. And to talk about the kinds of solutions that are being offered to address this, I want to turn to Pierre Poilievre, the front runner in the Conservative leadership race. He said that the reason people can't afford gas or groceries is, quote, a transfer of wealth from the have-nots to the have-yachts, which is admittedly pretty clever. And okay, so far so good. There's been this transfer of wealth. But then he goes on to blame the Bank of Canada for printing too much money and causing inflation. And when his critics accuse him of undermining trust in institutions like the central bank, he says people are just upset because he's, quote, rattling the elites. And I wanted to ask you, is he actually rattling the elite? Or what would it look like if the elite, the corporate elite in Canada, were actually rattled?
Well, Mr. Poilievre is no doubt a very clever communicator. His argument about what has caused the inflation, I think, is wrong. The Bank of Canada did not print money. The Bank of Canada did take extraordinary efforts during the initial period of the pandemic to stimulate credit creation and money supply at a moment when we thought we were all going into a deep, deep recession. In fact, we did go into the deepest recession since the 1930s, and in part thanks to what the Bank of Canada did, and in part thanks to what the federal government did with all of the income payments like the CERB and other income supports. We snapped out of that recession far quicker than most people thought. So, to some extent, the inflation that we're experiencing today is a side effect of the fact that our economic recovery from COVID has been faster than expected. But that's a good thing. That's the point. We could have avoided inflation if we'd have just stuck with a deep, long-lasting recession during the pandemic, and that obviously would be far, far worse. Um, Mr. Poilievre is trying to tap into a kind of a sense of working class outrage or discomfort or um, anger about how the economy has unfolded in recent decades. And in this regard, he's similar to other right wing populists around the world, like Donald Trump, who also tried to tap into deep working class anger about the disappearance of opportunity for working people. And there's certainly a reservoir of anger, and it's justified. Working people have seen their share of the economic pie shrink. They've seen, the hollowness of all of the promises about equal opportunity and so on. But Mr. Poilievre's direction is absolutely wrong and would make things much, much worse for working people than they already are. If we really want to help working people win back some of the wealth that has been redirected to elites, not because of the Bank of Canada printing money, but because of the power imbalance in our free market capitalist economy. That's the reason that the billionaires who own energy companies and grocery store chains are making out like bandits while the rest of us see a declining standard of living. And Mr. Poilievre's vision, to symbolically fire the governor of the Bank of Canada, that will do absolutely nothing to help workers. If we want to help workers, we could give grocery store workers a union that could win the $2 back, $2 an hour that was paid for a few short months during the pandemic. That should be a permanent thing, and other ways to put more money in the pockets of working people.